The church bells rang through the quiet town of Mill Haven, Alabama, on a cool spring afternoon in April 2019, signaling the marriage of two of its most cherished residents. Gabriel Kent, a dynamic 30-year-old preacher known for his passionate sermons and steadfast commitment to his congregation, was marrying Evelyn Parker, a 26-year-old pediatric nurse with a heart of gold. Their love story was one that the entire town celebrated. For weeks leading up to the wedding, whispers of admiration spread through the pews during Sunday services and around kitchen tables during family meals. Evelyn and Gabriel seemed to embody an ideal couple, devoted, kind, and deeply aligned in their values. The wedding held at Mill Haven's First Baptist Church was a dazzling event. The bride's ivory lace gowns sparkled beneath the colorful light from the stained glass windows, while Gabriel, dressed in a tailored navy suit, radiated the confidence of a man secure in his future. From the outside, the day seemed flawless, the type of wedding that could appear in a magazine. The altar was framed by beautiful flower arrangements, including white roses and baby's breath. The reception, hosted in the church's fellowship hall, featured a southern feast of smoked brisket, buttered cornbread, and peach cobbler served on vintage china. Friends offered heartfelt toasts to the couple's happiness, while guests danced to the smooth sounds of a live jazz band. Gabriel's laughter echoed through the hall as he playfully fed Evelyn a bite of cake, and Evelyn's cheeks flushed as she leaned into his embrace during their first dance. Yet beneath the surface of this seemingly perfect celebration, the seeds of a devastating mystery had already been sown. On the outside, Gabriel and Evelyn appeared to be deeply in love, but not everything about their relationship was as it appeared. Evelyn had grown up in Mill Haven, the youngest of three siblings and a familiar face at the town's annual summer festivals. A devout woman with a passion for helping others, she spent her days caring for sick children at the local hospital and volunteering at Gabriel's church. Gabriel, however, was a relative newcomer, having moved to Mill Haven 5 years earlier to become the youngest pastor in the church's history. With his booming voice, square jaw, and unwavering dedication to his congregation, Gabriel quickly became a respected figure in the community. When they began dating, churchgoers remarked on how well they seemed to complement one another. Gabriel's leadership and Evelyn's gentle kindness appeared to be a perfect match. However, there were always whispers. Some claimed Gabriel's charm was almost too perfect, his demeanor too polished, and his sermons carried a vague intensity that suggested a darker side. But Evelyn, swept away by love and captivated by Gabriel's magnetic presence, dismissed these concerns. When Gabriel proposed after only 8 months of dating, presenting her with a diamond ring set in an antique gold band, she said yes without a second thought. But less than 24 hours after the wedding, the fairy tale took a dramatic turn. By Sunday morning, Evelyn Parker had left her new husband's side, returned to her childhood home, and filed for an annulment. The news spread like wildfire, sending shockwaves through the town. How could a couple so seemingly perfect fall apart so quickly? Rumors quickly filled the silence left by Evelyn's absence. Some claimed Gabriel had a temper, while others speculated about infidelity. But no one could have anticipated the dark truth lurking beneath the surface, a truth that would shake the community's trust in the man they had once held in high esteem and lead to a shocking and fatal confrontation just weeks later. What had begun as a love story would end in tragedy, leaving behind unanswered questions and broken lives. The story of Gabriel Kent and Evelyn Parker is not just a tale of betrayal and heartbreak. It's a chilling reminder of how secrets, when left to fester, can destroy everything in their path. This is a case about the dangers of charm, hiding manipulation, a woman's fight for safety and justice, and the devastating cost of uncovering the truth. As we explore the events that led to this tragedy, one thing becomes clear. The line between victim and perpetrator is often far murkier than we'd like to believe. The romance between Gabriel Kent and Evelyn Parker had all the elements of a classic fairy tale. Mill Haven, a close-knit Alabama town, had followed their love story with admiration and excitement. Gabriel, a preacher with an almost magnetic presence, was widely respected by the congregation at First Baptist Church. His booming voice, sharp wit, and confident demeanor made him a natural leader, someone who could command attention with ease. Many at the church believed he was destined for greater things beyond their small town. Evelyn, on the other hand, was the town's sweetheart, gentle, compassionate, and diligent. As a pediatric nurse at Millhaven General Hospital, she was adored by her patients and their families. Together, they appeared to be a match made in heaven, two good souls destined to build a life centered around faith, community, and love. They met during a charity event hosted by the church. Evelyn had volunteered to help organize a food drive for underprivileged families, and Gabriel, as the church's preacher, had naturally assumed a leadership role. Their first interaction was almost cinematic. Evelyn, standing at a folding table sorting canned goods, was caught off guard when Gabriel approached her, his trademark warm smile on his face. "Miss Parker, it seems your heart is as big as this town," he remarked. She blushed at his charm, and from that moment on, they became inseparable. Over the following 8 months, their courtship became the talk of Millhaven. Gabriel showered Evelyn with attention, surprising her with handwritten notes, flowers delivered to her workplace, and spontaneous Bible study dates that often led to long discussions about their shared dreams. He insisted they maintain a pure relationship, a decision Evelyn respected, though at times she felt he was almost too rigid in his moral views. Still, his devotion reassured her, and when he proposed during a candlelit dinner at her favorite diner, she said yes without hesitation. The ring he placed on her finger, a family heirloom with a modest yet beautiful diamond, seemed to seal their promise of a perfect future. Their wedding, held on a sunny Saturday in April, was the event of the year. Evelyn walked down the aisle in a lace gown that had once belonged to her late grandmother, her face glowing with happiness. Gabriel, standing at the altar, appeared every bit the proud and loving groom. The vows they exchanged were deeply personal, bringing tears to the eyes of their guests. Evelyn referred to Gabriel as her rock and guiding light, while Gabriel promised to love, protect, and cherish her as God had commanded. The reception was a lavish affair. Evelyn's father had spared no expense, hiring a live jazz band and catering the event with Millhaven's finest dishes. Guests laughed and mingled as they sipped sweet tea and lemonade from mason jars. Gabriel, always the center of attention, charmed everyone with an impromptu speech about the sanctity of marriage. Evelyn, meanwhile, basked in the glow of their perfect day, her heart full as she envisioned the life they were about to begin together. But as the evening wore on, cracks began to show. Gabriel, usually composed and reserved, began drinking more than usual. Guests noticed how his behavior began to change. His laughter grew louder, his gestures more exaggerated, and his words less restrained. Evelyn tried to brush it off as post-wedding excitement, but a sense of discomfort started to settle in. She had never seen him like this before, and when he drank his fourth glass of bourbon and loudly interrupted a toast, she felt embarrassed. By the time they left for the small bungalow they had rented for their honeymoon night, Evelyn's excitement had turned into nervousness. Gabriel was clearly drunk, stumbling slightly as he helped her out of the car. Inside, he became unusually loud, making jokes that felt strangely cruel. Evelyn tried to laugh along, but her unease grew. When he finally collapsed onto the bed and started struggling with his tie, she hesitated before helping him undress. It was then that she noticed something she couldn't ignore: a series of faint scars running across his lower abdomen and groin. "Gabriel, what happened here?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. He chuckled, slurring his words. "War wounds, darling," he muttered, waving his hand dismissively. When she pressed him further, his tone shifted. "Let's just say, not all women are as kind as you, Evelyn." The cryptic comment sent a chill down her spine. She stepped back, her mind racing with questions. What did he mean? Why hadn't she noticed the scars before? And why did he suddenly seem like a stranger? As Gabriel drifted into a drunken sleep, Evelyn sat in the corner of the room, her perfect day unraveling into a night of doubt and unease. Evelyn barely slept that night. As Gabriel snored softly in the bed, she stared at the ceiling, replaying his drunken words in her mind. "Not all women are as kind as you." What could he possibly mean? Evelyn had always believed Gabriel to be a man of integrity, someone who lived by the moral code he preached. Yet the scars on his body and his cryptic words hinted at a side of him she didn't recognize, a side that terrified her. By morning, Gabriel stirred, his hangover evident in the slow, sluggish way he moved. Evelyn, trying to keep her voice steady, brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "Gabriel," she began carefully, "about what you said last night. What did you mean?" He squinted at her, his face a mix of confusion and irritation. "What are you talking about?" The scars. You said they were from women? What happened? For a moment, Gabriel's expression hardened, a flicker of something dark crossing his face. Then he forced a smile, his tone light. Evelyn, I was drunk. I don't even remember what I said. You're reading too much into it. But Evelyn couldn't let it go. Please, Gabriel, I need to understand. Did you get hurt? Was it an accident? His smile disappeared. It's nothing, just some complicated past relationships. He sighed. I've made mistakes, Evelyn. But hasn't everyone? His voice became sharper as he added, You said you love me, right? Love means accepting someone, flaws and all. Evelyn felt a pang of guilt but couldn't shake the uneasiness building within her. Gabriel's avoidance only deepened her suspicions. After he left to shower, she began rummaging through his belongings, hoping for answers. What she discovered instead made her heart race. A hidden folder of photographs tucked in his suitcase. The pictures showed Gabriel with several women, some of whom Evelyn recognized from the church. In some of the photos, the women looked distressed or upset, their expressions unsettling. When Gabriel returned, Evelyn confronted him, holding up the photos. What is this, Gabriel? Who are these women? For a brief moment, he stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then with an eerily calm tone, he said, They're from my past, Evelyn, and they're no longer your concern. Evelyn's hands shook as she placed the photos on the table. I can't do this, she whispered. I thought I knew you, but I don't. Gabriel's calm demeanor cracked. You're my wife now, he said, his voice rising. You don't get to leave because of some mistakes I've made. You're supposed to stand by me. But Evelyn couldn't hear him over the deafening thrum of her own heartbeat. She grabbed her purse and fled the house, her mind racing with one thought. She had made a huge mistake. By the end of the day, Evelyn was back at her parents' house filling out the annulment papers. Whatever Gabriel's past entailed, she wanted no part of it. Little did she know her decision to leave would spark a chain of events that would lead to unimaginable tragedy. Evelyn sat on the old leather couch in her parents' living room, staring blankly at the annulment papers before her. Her mother, Margaret Parker, a no-nonsense woman with sharp features softened by age, sat beside her, holding her hand. Evelyn had called her parents that morning, sobbing, asking if she could come home. She didn't go into much detail, just enough to convey that her marriage had ended before it even began. Margaret's response was practical, as always. If you know it's not right, there's no shame in ending it now. Better 24 hours than 24 years. Her father, Harold Parker, was quieter but equally supportive, giving her a gentle nod and a reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. They didn't press for details. Evelyn's pale, drawn face said everything. Filing for an annulment less than a day after her wedding felt surreal, but Evelyn knew she had no other choice. Her trust in Gabriel was shattered, and the dark secrets he had hinted at were far too much to ignore. As a nurse, she had learned to trust her instincts, and every part of her was telling her to run. The annulment process moved quickly, helped by the fact that their marriage had barely started. Evelyn's lawyer, an old family friend named Dan Whitaker, assured her that the process would go smoothly given the circumstances. Irreconcilable differences, he said, jotting the phrase onto the papers. That's all the court needs to know. Gabriel, however, didn't take the news well. When Evelyn called him to let him know her decision, he initially laughed, dismissing her words as a joke. But when she remained firm, his tone shifted. Evelyn, you're not thinking straight, he said, his voice low and insistent. I understand you're upset, but this is marriage. You don't just walk away at the first sign of trouble. It's more than trouble, Gabriel, Evelyn replied, her voice trembling. I don't feel safe with you. I can't trust you. Gabriel's response was chilling. You're my wife, Evelyn. That means something, and I'm not going to let you throw it all away. Evelyn hung up, her hands shaking. She blocked his number immediately after. Over the next few hours, Gabriel left a series of frantic voicemails, ranging from desperate pleas for forgiveness to angry accusations of betrayal. Evelyn didn't listen to most of them, but the few she did hear unsettled her deeply. In one, he said, If you walk away from me, you'll regret it. I promise you that. Despite her fears, Evelyn felt a sense of relief as she signed the annulment papers. She had taken the first step toward reclaiming her life, but the relief was short-lived. As news of her sudden departure spread through Millhaven, so did rumors about what went wrong. In a small town like Millhaven, Secrets don't stay hidden for long. By Monday morning, the news of Evelyn's hasty annulment had become the main topic at the local diner, where regulars gathered for coffee and gossip. "Did you hear about Evelyn and the preacher?" one woman whispered to her friend. "She left him the morning after the wedding. Can you believe that?" Speculation spread quickly. Some blamed Evelyn, suggesting she had cold feet or wasn't ready for marriage. Others pointed fingers at Gabriel, commenting that his charm had always seemed a bit too rehearsed. There was something off about him, one church member confided to another during the Wednesday night prayer meeting. Always so polished, so perfect. Makes you wonder what he was hiding. As the rumors spread, more troubling stories about Gabriel began to surface. One of the church's younger members, Sophia Tanner, came forward with a shocking revelation. She had briefly dated Gabriel before he started courting Evelyn. "At first, he was everything I thought I wanted," Sophia told a close friend, who later shared the story with others. "But he was controlling. He didn't like it when I spent time with my friends or family. And when I tried to end things, he became intense." Sophia's account painted a disturbing picture of a man who was far from the virtuous leader he appeared to be. According to her, Gabriel used his position as a preacher to manipulate people into trusting him. "He made me feel like I was the problem," Sophia said. "Like I wasn't good enough, and I needed to change to make him happy." Another former church member, Stacy Wyatt, shared an even more unsettling story. Stacy had been a member of the congregation for years and had always admired Gabriel's passion and eloquence. But during a private counseling session, she said he crossed a line. "He made me feel uncomfortable," Stacy confided to a friend. "He kept asking personal questions, things that had nothing to do with what I came to talk about. And when I tried to change the subject, he got defensive." Stacy's story, combined with Sophia's and the growing rumors about Evelyn's departure, began to tarnish Gabriel's once perfect reputation. Church attendance dropped as members questioned his integrity. By the end of the week, the church's board of elders called a meeting to discuss his future. When Gabriel was confronted about the allegations, he denied everything. "These are baseless accusations," he insisted. "People are trying to tear me down because they're jealous of my success." But his protests fell on deaf ears. The board voted unanimously to ask for his resignation, citing concerns over his behavior and the growing division within the congregation. Gabriel's fall from grace was swift and brutal. The man who had once been the pride of Millhaven was now its outcast, his name spoken with pity and disdain. For Evelyn, the aftermath was bittersweet. On one hand, she felt validated knowing that others were beginning to see the side of Gabriel she had witnessed on their wedding night. On the other hand, she couldn't escape the feeling that her nightmare was far from over. As the rumors continued to spread, Evelyn tried to focus on rebuilding her life. She returned to work at the hospital, where her colleagues offered quiet support but refrained from prying. She deleted her social media accounts, hoping to shield herself from the constant gossip. But despite her efforts to move on, she couldn't shake the feeling that Gabriel wasn't finished with her yet, and she was right. Gabriel, humiliated and furious over his public downfall, was already planning his next move. What began as a dream wedding had turned into a waking nightmare, and the worst was yet to come. Gabriel Kent was no longer the golden boy of Millhaven. Once admired for his charisma and leadership, he had become a figure of town-wide scorn. Stripped of his position at the church and shunned by the community, Gabriel spiraled into bitterness and self-destruction. The man who had once preached about resilience and forgiveness now spent his days in the dim corner of O'Malley's bar on the edge of town. The bartender, Joe Franklin, a grizzled Vietnam veteran, noticed how Gabriel changed over the weeks. He'd come in, order whiskey neat, and just sit there staring at the wall, Joe later recalled. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was all about that wife of his. Said she ruined his life. Gabriel's obsession with Evelyn grew with each passing day. He started calling her from unknown numbers, leaving messages that alternated between desperate pleas for reconciliation and angry tirades. Evelyn had already blocked his number and changed hers, but he found other ways to contact her. One morning, she opened her mailbox to find a handwritten letter from Gabriel. The pages were filled with a chilling blend of remorse and veiled threats. "You were supposed to save me, Evelyn," one line read, "but now you've left me to drown." Evelyn's parents urged her to file a restraining order, but Evelyn hesitated. Despite everything, part of her still felt guilty for how abruptly she had ended the marriage. "What if I pushed him over the edge?" she confided to her mother. "What if I'm the reason he's falling apart?" But Gabriel wasn't just falling apart. He was unraveling in ways that terrified even those who knew him well. Sophia Tanner, his former girlfriend, saw him lurking outside her apartment one night. "I saw him standing by the lamppost just staring at my building," she later recalled. "When I called out to him, he walked away without saying a word." The breaking point came when Gabriel began showing up at Evelyn's workplace. He would sit in the hospital's waiting room for hours, claiming he was there to visit a sick relative. The nurses became suspicious when they realized he had no patient to see. One afternoon, Evelyn found him waiting by her car in the staff parking lot. "Please, Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling. "I just need to talk to you," Evelyn said, trying to keep her composure. "Gabriel, you have to leave. This is not right." "You're my wife," he yelled, his voice booming across the parking lot. "You can't just shut me out." The hospital security staff quickly escorted him off the premises, though Evelyn was left rattled. That night, she went ahead and filed for a restraining order, which was granted swiftly. Gabriel was enraged when the court papers arrived. To him, this wasn't simply a legal barrier. It was a betrayal. And betrayal, to Gabriel, called for revenge. On a warm evening in late May, after a long day at the hospital, Evelyn returned to her modest home. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over her front yard. She locked the door behind her, checked the security camera footage on her phone, and double-checked the deadbolt, a new routine she had started after Gabriel's behavior had become unpredictable. As she settled on the couch, her phone vibrated with a text from her coworker and friend, Anna. "Dinner this weekend?" it read. Evelyn smiled slightly and began typing a reply. But her brief moment of peace was shattered by the sudden sound of breaking glass coming from the kitchen. Her heart skipped a beat. Grabbing her phone, she dialed 911 as she carefully made her way toward the kitchen. "Someone's breaking into my house," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I think it's my ex-husband." Before the dispatcher could respond, a figure emerged from the kitchen's shadow. Gabriel, his face flushed and his movements unsteady. Evelyn froze. He smelled of alcohol, and his bloodshot eyes locked onto hers with a gaze that sent a shiver down her spine. "You think you can just cut me out of your life?" Gabriel slurred, stumbling toward her. "After everything I've done for you? You're my wife, Evelyn. You belong to me." "Gabriel, you have to leave," Evelyn said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I've already called the police." But Gabriel didn't stop. He grabbed her arm, his grip excruciatingly tight. "We're going to fix this," he said, his voice cracking. "We're going to be a family again." The argument intensified as Evelyn tried to pull away. Gabriel's fury reached its peak, and he shoved her against the wall. In panic, Evelyn grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife lying on the counter. "Stay away," she shouted, holding the knife between them. Gabriel stepped forward, his face twisted in rage. "You're not going to hurt me," he sneered. "You don't have the courage." In a blur of action, everything spiraled out of control. Driven by fear and desperation, Evelyn reacted on pure instinct. When the police arrived minutes later, responding to her frantic 911 call, they found Gabriel lying on the kitchen floor, a single stab wound to his chest. Evelyn, shaking and covered in blood, was curled up in the corner, clutching her phone while sobbing into the receiver. "I didn't mean to. He wouldn't stop," she stammered as the officers approached. The police quickly secured the scene, treating it as a potential self-defense case. Gabriel's body was transported to the county coroner's office, and Evelyn was taken into custody for questioning. Her once peaceful bungalow, which had symbolized new beginnings, was now a crime scene marked by yellow tape and the flashing lights of police cars. For Evelyn, the nightmare was far from over. The events of that night would soon unfold into a more complicated investigation than she had ever anticipated. What initially seemed like a tragic act of self-defense would soon raise questions of intent, fear, and the dark truths that had led to this deadly encounter. The following morning, detectives arrived at Evelyn Parker's home to investigate the scene of the fatal confrontation. Lead Detective Marcus Holloway, a seasoned officer with 2 decades of experience, immediately noticed the unsettling calm in the house. The broken glass in the kitchen, the overturned chair, and the dark stain on the tile floor all told the tale of a struggle, but something about it didn't seem right to him. Evelyn, having been released from the initial holding cell on her lawyer's advice, was cooperative but visibly shaken during her interview. She recounted the events of that night in broken, tearful sentences, describing how Gabriel had broken in, threatened her, and forced her to defend herself. "He wouldn't stop," she repeated, her voice quivering. "I was so scared. He grabbed me, and I didn't know what else to do. At first, Evelyn's story appeared clear, aligning with her 911 call and the initial evidence. The broken kitchen window backed up her claim of forced entry, and Gabriel's documented erratic behavior and history of harassment provided a plausible motive for self-defense. However, as the detectives dug deeper, small inconsistencies in Evelyn's account began to raise doubts. Forensic evidence became a key part of the investigation. The medical examiner's report revealed that Gabriel had died from a single stab wound to the chest, but the angle of the wound suggested that he had been sitting, or possibly kneeling, when it was inflicted. This detail didn't match Evelyn's claim that Gabriel had lunged at her in a rage. Detective Holloway brought in a forensic analyst to reconstruct the scene. Using trajectory mapping and blood spatter analysis, the team concluded that Gabriel had likely been in a submissive position when he received the fatal wound. If he had been attacking her, Holloway noted in his report, the evidence would suggest a more chaotic struggle. This points to something different, something calculated. Adding complexity to the case were a series of text messages found on Evelyn's phone. Hours before the incident, she had messaged her best friend Anna, expressing both fear and frustration. "He's been outside my house again," one message read. Another, sent just before the break-in, was more troubling. "He deserves to pay for everything he's done." Detectives also discovered that Evelyn had recently contacted Sophia Tanner, one of Gabriel's former lovers. Phone records showed a 30-minute call between the two women just days before the confrontation. When questioned, Sophia admitted that she and Evelyn had discussed Gabriel's history of manipulation and abuse. "She wanted to know if I thought he was dangerous," Sophia explained. "I told her the truth. He was unpredictable and obsessed with control." This revelation, combined with the forensic evidence and Evelyn's text messages, cast doubt on her claim of self-defense. Prosecutors began building a case that suggested Evelyn might have lured Gabriel to her home with the intention of confronting and ultimately killing him. Still, Evelyn's defense team argued that her actions were driven by fear and desperation. Her lawyer, Dan Whitaker, emphasized Gabriel's history of harassment and the psychological toll it had taken on Evelyn. "She lived in constant fear," Whitaker said during a press conference. "This was a tragic accident, but it was also an act of survival." As the investigation progressed, public opinion became divided. Some viewed Evelyn as a victim of abuse, forced to protect herself from a dangerous man. Others saw her actions as premeditated, pointing to the text messages and forensic evidence as signs of intent. The media coverage only intensified the debate, with headlines like "From Bride to Killer," "The Evelyn Parker Story," dominating the local news. By the time Evelyn was officially charged with voluntary manslaughter, the stage was set for a trial that would captivate the town and force everyone to confront the fine line between victim and perpetrator. As the trial began, the courtroom was filled with spectators, reporters, and townspeople eager to witness the unfolding drama. Evelyn sat at the defense table, dressed in a modest navy dress, appearing every bit the terrified woman her lawyer had described. Across from her, Gabriel's family sat in the first row, their grief palpable as they clutched framed photographs of him from happier days. Prosecutor Linda Carrington opened the case with a devastating narrative. "This was not a case of self-defense," she declared to the jury. "This was a calculated act of revenge. Evelyn Parker lured Gabriel Kent to her home, and when he was at his most vulnerable, she stabbed him in cold blood," Carrington stated, presenting the evidence. The text messages suggesting premeditation, the forensic report indicating that Gabriel had been sitting or kneeling when stabbed, and Evelyn's conversation with Sophia Tanner about Gabriel's behavior. "She knew what she was doing," Carrington concluded, "and she made sure he couldn't walk away this time." The defense, led by Dan Whitaker, countered with a narrative of fear and survival. Whitaker painted Gabriel as a man who had terrorized Evelyn, using his charm and position as a preacher to manipulate and control not just her, but several women before her. Evelyn Parker was not the first woman to fall victim to Gabriel Kent's lies, Whitaker told the jury. "But she was the first to fight back," Whitaker said. He brought several witnesses to testify, including Sophia Tanner and Stacy Wyatt, who both shared their accounts of Gabriel's pattern of emotional abuse and controlling behavior. "He made you feel trapped," Sophia recalled, her voice breaking, "like he owned you." One of the most emotional moments in the trial occurred when Evelyn herself took the stand. Her voice trembled as she recounted the events leading to the fatal encounter. I begged him to leave me alone, she said, tears streaming down her face. But he wouldn't stop. He broke into my house, grabbed me, and said I was his. I thought he was going to kill me. During cross-examination, Carrington pressed Evelyn on contradictions in her story. Why did you tell your friend that Gabriel deserved to pay just hours before his death? She asked. Doesn't that suggest you intended to harm him? Evelyn paused, gripping the witness stand. I was angry, she admitted. I was scared. Angry and exhausted from living in constant fear. But I didn't plan to kill him. I just wanted him to leave me alone. The trial's turning point came when the defense revealed a surprising piece of evidence. A voicemail from Gabriel left on Evelyn's phone just days before the incident. In the recording, his voice was slurred but threatening. You can't escape me, Evelyn, he said. If I can't have you, no one will. The voicemail cast Gabriel in a new light, causing some jurors who had previously doubted Evelyn's claims to reconsider. Still, the prosecution argued that the voicemail didn't justify what they believed to be a premeditated act. As the trial neared its end, the jury faced a challenging decision. Was Evelyn Parker a desperate woman pushed to the edge by an abusive ex-husband? Or was she a calculating murderer who used Gabriel's past to justify her actions? In their closing statements, both sides urged the jury to evaluate the evidence carefully. This case isn't about who Gabriel Kent was, Carrington stated. It's about what Evelyn Parker did that night and the choices she made. However, Whitaker asked the jury to view the case through Evelyn's perspective. Imagine living every day in fear, he said. Imagine knowing that the man who once promised to protect you is now the one you need protection from. Evelyn Parker didn't choose this path. It was forced upon her. As the jury began deliberating, Millhaven waited anxiously for the verdict. Whatever the outcome, one thing was clear. The case had exposed the hidden truths behind a seemingly perfect life. The jury deliberated for 3 tense days, with the weight of their decision bearing heavily on them. The evidence had painted conflicting portraits of both Evelyn Parker and Gabriel Kent. On one hand, Evelyn was a woman who had been stalked, harassed, and terrorized by her ex-husband, a man with a known history of manipulation and control. On the other hand, the prosecution presented a case suggesting premeditation, citing her cryptic text messages and forensic evidence that undermined her claim of self-defense. The courtroom was packed on the day the verdict was read. Millhaven's small population had gathered, with those unable to get in standing outside, straining to hear any news. Inside, Evelyn sat at the defense table, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Her parents sat behind her, their faces tense. On the opposite side, Gabriel's family sat silently, their grief evident. When the jury returned, their faces were somber. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood to deliver their decision. We find the defendant, Evelyn Parker, guilty of voluntary manslaughter, he said, his voice firm yet hesitant. Gasps echoed through the room, followed by murmurs of mixed reactions. Some nodded in agreement, while others shook their heads in disbelief. The judge thanked the jury and proceeded to sentencing. Evelyn stood, visibly trembling, as the judge addressed her. Ms. Parker, this court acknowledges the mitigating circumstances surrounding your actions. However, the law demands accountability. You are sentenced to 10 years in prison with eligibility for parole after 5 years. Evelyn's knees buckled as she absorbed the sentence. Her lawyer, Dan Whitaker, placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Meanwhile, Gabriel's family quietly exited the courtroom, their faces a mix of sorrow and anger. For them, no verdict could bring closure. The trial's outcome sparked widespread debate, both in Millhaven and beyond. Local media dissected every detail of the case, while social media became a battleground for opposing views. Some felt that Evelyn's sentence was too harsh given the years of psychological torment she had endured, while others believed it was too lenient, pointing to the prosecution's claim of intent. Evelyn herself remained silent, declining interviews and avoiding public attention. Her days were now spent in the harsh reality of prison life, attending counseling sessions and reflecting on the events that led to her conviction. Despite her circumstances, she held on to the hope of one day gaining her freedom and rebuilding her life. 5 years later, Evelyn Parker was released on parole. The town of Millhaven, though quieter than during the trial, still bore the scars of the case. For some, her release marked the end of a tragic chapter, while for others, it reopened old wounds. Evelyn returned to her parents' home, where she was met with quiet support. The transition to civilian life was difficult, as her once close friendships had withered, and she struggled to trust others after the betrayal and judgment she had endured. She spent her time volunteering at a local shelter for women and children, using her experiences to help those trapped in toxic relationships. Reflecting on her time in prison, Evelyn described it as both a punishment and a period of self-discovery. I had to confront not just what happened that night, but everything that led to it, she later shared in a rare interview with a local journalist. I realized that fear can drive you to do things you never imagined. But I also learned that healing begins by acknowledging the pain. The case left a lasting impact on Millhaven. Gabriel Kent's former congregation remained divided over his legacy. Some still viewed him as a flawed but devoted preacher, while others saw him as a manipulative figure who used his position to harm others. The church itself underwent significant changes, appointing new leadership and enacting stricter policies to protect its members. The wider implications of the case were felt far beyond Millhaven. Domestic abuse advocacy groups highlighted Evelyn's story as an example of the severe consequences of ignoring warning signs and failing to provide adequate support. Legal experts debated the nuances of self-defense cases, particularly those involving psychological abuse and stalking. Eventually, a documentary crew approached Evelyn, hoping to capture the complexity of her story. Although hesitant, she agreed, aiming to shed light on the darker aspects of her relationship with Gabriel and the systemic failures that had contributed to her desperation. The resulting documentary, Broken Vows, the Evelyn Parker story, sparked national conversation, calling for better resources for abuse survivors. In the final scenes, Evelyn is shown walking along the outskirts of Millhaven, her face marked with quiet determination. "I'm not proud of what happened," she says in voiceover, "but I'm not ashamed to say I survived. And if sharing my story helps even one person find the strength to leave an abusive situation, then maybe something good can come from all this pain." For Millhaven, the case served as a cautionary tale, a harsh reminder that even the most seemingly perfect lives can conceal dangerous secrets. For Evelyn, it marked the beginning of a slow journey toward redemption, one step at a time. And for the world, it underscored the complexities of justice, the weight of trauma, and the resilience of the human spirit in the face of unspeakable darkness.